At 6:10 on the hottest Saturday in August, trailers were already backing into the Morrow County sale barn. Most of them carried cattle people could no longer afford to feed. Mae Calder drove past those trailers in the opposite direction, with 63 ducks in ventilated crates, 12 sacks of rice in the truck bed, and mud on her boots from a field the county had written off as drowned. The strange part was not that her field still had water. The strange part was that the water had become her most reliable crop. Across the road from the sale barn, the Saturday farm market was opening under a tin-roof pavilion. The drought had burned the county down to shades of tan. Tomatoes were small and hard. Sweet corn had fired at the edges before the ears filled. 2 vegetable growers had not come at all. Mae parked at the far end, lowered the tailgate, and started unloading. Brown paper sacks of rice, cartons of pale duck eggs, jars of pickled rice shoots, a cooler packed with dressed ducks for customers who had ordered ahead. The woman at the next table stared at the sacks. "Where did you grow rice?" Mae pointed south, toward County Road 14, the bottom meadow. The woman stopped arranging her peaches. "The field under water?" Mae nodded. "The one they said was ruined, that one." By 7:30, people were standing 3 deep at Mae's table. By 8:15, the eggs were gone. At 8:40, a restaurant owner from 2 towns over bought the last 6 sacks of rice and asked how much she could deliver every month. And all morning, the same sentence moved through the pavilion in lowered voices. That came from the drowned field. 3 years earlier, the drowned field had been the most useful 6 acres on Mae Calder's farm. Calder Place was not large. 38 acres of mixed ground in the Arkansas foothills. A weathered house, 2 barns, a machine shed with 1 wall that leaned, and enough pasture to carry a small herd if Mae managed it carefully. The bottom meadow made the rest of the farm possible. It lay below the road, where 2 slopes folded together before opening toward a narrow creek. In spring it produced the first grass. In late summer, when the ridges turned brittle, it held moisture for another 2 or 3 weeks. Mae cut hay there once, sometimes twice, then let the cattle graze the regrowth. Her father had called it the farm's last green pocket. He meant that in a dry year, when every other acre quit first, the bottom meadow quit last. Then the county rebuilt the road. County Road 14 had flooded twice in 5 years, and the county engineer's office approved a larger bridge, a higher roadbed, and a new stormwater channel designed to move runoff away from the pavement quickly. The road rose 18 inches. An old stone drain under the shoulder was filled and sealed. The new channel gathered water from nearly a mile of road and pushed it through a concrete outlet above the northeast corner of Mae's Meadow. On paper, the project worked. The road stopped flooding. Mae's field started. The first storm after construction sent a brown wall of water across the fence line. It spread through the meadow, slowed at the center, and backed against the raised roadbed that now acted like a low dam. 3 days later, the field was still covered. A week later, the grass began to yellow. By the end of May, the roots had started to rot. Mae called the county. The inspector arrived in a white pickup with the seal of the engineering office on the door. His name was Colin Rusk. He wore pressed khakis, a clean blue shirt, and boots that looked recently purchased. He walked 20 yards into the field before mud swallowed one boot to the ankle. Mae watched him pull it free. He took photographs. He measured standing water. He checked the new outlet, the road grade, and the edge of the creek. Then he stood beside his truck and told her the field had undergone what he called a hydrologic conversion. It was no longer suitable for conventional forage production. The county could review a damage claim, he said. It could not promise restoration. Rerouting the outlet would require reopening the road project, redesigning the drainage plan, and finding money that had already been spent. Mae asked him what she was supposed to do with 6 acres of standing water. Rusk looked back at the meadow. That ground may not have an agricultural use anymore, he said it gently. That did not make the sentence lighter. He left a packet of forms on her tailgate and drove away. Mae stood beside the truck until the sound of his tires disappeared. Then she put the forms in the cab and went back for her rubber boots. The county's conclusion reached town before Mae's claim packet reached her kitchen table. At the feed store, men discussed the field as if it had become public property. One said she should hire an excavator and cut a ditch straight to the creek. Another said the roadbed would keep backing water up no matter what she dug. Wade Mercer, who ran 80 cows on the limestone ridge east of town, gave the situation the line everyone remembered: "You can't bail soup." The men laughed because it was sharp and because it sounded true. By the next week, someone had painted the word "Soup Farm" on a scrap of plywood and leaned it against the fence after dark. Mae found it in the morning. She pulled it out of the mud, carried it to the barn, and used the back of it as a work surface. She did not go looking for Wade. She did not call the newspaper. She did not argue with the county. She started measuring. For 41 mornings, Mae walked the meadow before breakfast. She marked the intake point with orange flagging. She drove stakes where the water reached 6 inches, 12 inches, and 2 feet. She watched how quickly the first muddy surge arrived after rain. She watched where the current slowed. She watched where leaves and road grit settled. She watched a narrow line of clearer water leave the center and move toward the old creek draw at the southwest corner. What the county had called standing water was not actually standing. It entered hard, it spread, it dropped its sediment, it warmed in the shallows, then it moved again, not quickly, but predictably. Mae began to understand that the field was not one flooded place. It was 4 different water conditions lying beside one another: a violent entry, a dirty settling zone, a broad shallow shelf, and a deeper center that held cool water long after the edges warmed. That winter she read everything she could find: constructed wetlands, farm ponds, sediment forebays, small-scale rice systems, duck grazing, first flush runoff control. She called the state extension office so many times that the water specialist began answering the phone with, "What did the meadow do today?" Mae learned enough to become cautious. Road runoff could carry oil, metal dust, rubber residue, and bacteria. If she intended to grow food, guessing was not acceptable. So before she planted anything, she paid for water tests. Then she paid for another round after a heavy storm. Then a third, taken after the water had crossed the field. The results were not perfect. The water entering the meadow carried too much suspended sediment and a measurable petroleum residue after the first rain following a dry spell. But the samples taken farther downslope were cleaner. The field itself was already filtering part of what entered it. That did not mean the water was safe. It meant filtration could be designed instead of assumed. Mae drew her first plan on the plywood sign that still said Sop Farm on the other side. The system would begin with a catch basin at the county outlet, deep enough to take the force out of the first surge and collect road grit. From there, the water would enter a gravel trench planted with rushes and sedges. A first flush gate would let her divert the dirtiest initial runoff away from food-growing cells after long dry periods. Beyond the filter, she would build 3 shallow terraces for rice. At the lowest point, she would deepen the existing basin into a refuge pond, and through the rice cells, she would run ducks, not decorative ducks, working ducks, cocky Campbells, a lean egg-laying breed known for foraging. They would eat insects, clip young weeds, stir the water surface, and return fertility to the system. The rice would shade the water. The water would cool the roots. The refuge pond would hold enough volume to keep the terraces wet when the county outlet slowed. The whole thing depended on control. Not control over whether water arrived. That decision had already been made by the road. Control over where the water went next. Mae did not tell the feed store crowd. She sold 9 cows to finance the first build. That was the part no one saw from the road. The cattle trailer leaving half empty. The check deposited. The seed ordered. The used laser level bought from a contractor in Russellville. The second-hand culvert pipe. The truckloads of gravel. The sleepless calculation at the kitchen table when every expense looked small alone and impossible together. She began in February. The old tractor could shape the terraces only when the ground was firm enough to hold it. Most days it was not. She worked the edges with a rented mini excavator and finished the grades by hand. The first catch basin was too small. A March storm filled it in 20 minutes and pushed silt straight through the gravel trench. Mae widened it. The first terrace leaked along an old mole channel. She dug the wall out and packed it again. The first flush gate jammed because she had built it too tight. She rebuilt it with more clearance and a counterweight made from a brake drum. Every correction cost time. Every correction cost money. From the road, the work looked like a woman moving mud from one place to another. Wade Mercer slowed his truck when he passed. Once he stopped at the fence. "You putting in a marina?" Mae kept checking the grade rod. "No. What is it?" "A farm." Wade looked across the water. It was a farm. Mae moved the rod 6 feet and checked the level again. He waited for more. She gave him none. By late April, the first rice shoots were showing in straight green lines across the shallow terraces. Mae brought home 63 ducklings and raised them under heat lamps in the equipment shed. For the first time since the road project, the field looked intentional. Then the storm came. It arrived after 12 dry days, just before midnight, hard enough to rattle the windows. Mae woke to the sound and knew before she reached the porch that the county outlet would be running full. She pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and drove the tractor down to the meadow. The beam caught water pouring through the concrete mouth with the force of a broken hydrant. The catch basin rose. The first flush gate opened. Then a branch jammed sideways in the spillway. Water climbed over the berm. One terrace broke. A dark sheet rolled across the young rice and tore a gap through the second wall. Mae climbed off the tractor into knee-deep water and tried to pull the branch free. The current knocked her sideways. She caught the fence post with one hand and lost the flashlight with the other. For a few seconds, the only light came from the tractor behind her and the white churn of water in front of her. She let go of the branch. She backed away. By dawn, 2 terraces had drained. Nearly 2 acres of rice seed were gone. The gravel filter was buried in silt, and at the edge of the catch basin, a thin rainbow sheen moved across the water. Mae stood there in the cold morning and felt the full weight of what she had done. She had sold cattle that had taken years to build. She had spent most of the money. She had converted her best hay ground into an experiment, and the first serious storm had broken it in one night. Colin Rusk came out 2 days later after Mae reported the spillway blockage. He looked at the breached walls, the flattened rice, and the oily line caught in the reeds. He did not say, "I told you so." He did not need to. The county's original conclusion stood all around them. Mae asked whether the outlet could be fitted with a debris rack. Rusk said it could be studied. She asked how long that would take. He said he could not promise. Mae looked at the damaged terraces. "Then I'll build one on my side." Rusk hesitated. "You understand the county cannot certify food production from road runoff. I'm not asking you to certify it. What are you asking? For the discharge volume records from the road project. Peak flow, design storm, all of it." He studied her face. Then he nodded. "I can get you those." Mae destroyed the surviving first planting. That decision hurt more than the breach. Some of the rice might have been fine, Might was not enough. She drained the growing cells, shoveled out contaminated silt, replaced the top layer of gravel, and sent new water samples to the lab. She added a steel debris screen. She doubled the emergency spillway. She installed a bypass trench that could carry the first dirty surge around the rice cells entirely, and she raised every terrace wall 4 inches above the highest water mark from the storm. The second planting went in 6 weeks late. The ducklings were nearly grown before Mae let them onto the first terrace. They stepped into the shallow water as a flock, cautious for 3 seconds, then spread between the rice rows and began feeding. Mae watched them from the gate. The field did not look like the plan in her notebook. It looked rougher, more patched, more expensive. But it worked. Water entered the catch basin. Sediment dropped. The first flush bypass carried the dirtiest surge away. Cleaner water crossed the gravel and sedge filter. The terraces filled slowly. The refuge pond held what the rice did not need. The ducks moved through the system as if the field had been built for them. That first harvest was small. 420 pounds of rice after milling. Enough duck eggs to start selling a few dozen each week. No profit after expenses, not even close. But the water test stayed within the standards Mae and the extension specialist had set. The terraces held through autumn rain, and the county's non-agricultural ground produced food. The second year, Mae improved the gates, widened the filter strip, and planted a larger rice area. She learned to rotate the ducks so they did not trample young plants. She learned that their value was greatest after the rice had rooted but before the canopy closed. She learned to use the refuge pond as a buffer, drawing it down before a forecast storm, so the field had room to receive new water. The system became less like a rescue project and more like a farm. Still, almost no one believed it mattered. A few customers bought the eggs. A chef bought rice once and said he liked it. Wade stopped making marina jokes, but in town, Mae's project remained a curiosity. A woman farming water because she had lost the land. Then the rain stopped. At first, no one called it drought. April was dry, May was drier. June brought 2 storms that split around Morrow County and dropped rain everywhere except where people needed it. By the first week of July, the ridge pastures had turned silver. By the third week, the cattle ponds were shrinking away from their banks. The county went 47 days without measurable rain. Hay yields came in at less than half normal. Feed prices rose 31% between June and August. The sale barn added a second weekly auction because ranchers were unloading animals faster than the regular schedule could handle. Every Monday and Thursday, trailers lined the road. Cows that should have stayed for years left in groups of 10, 20, 50. Wade Mercer sold 18 head in July. Then 12 more in August. He stopped lingering at the feed store. At Calder Place, the ridge pasture failed too. Mae was not protected from the drought. Her remaining cattle needed hay. Her garden burned. The creek dropped to stones. But the bottom meadow held water. Not because the drought was imaginary. Because Mae had spent 2 years building storage into the exact place the county had forced water to go. The refuge pond had depth. The terraces lost less moisture because the rice shaded the surface. The ducks found snails, insects, fallen grain, and duckweed in the system, reducing the amount of purchased feed Mae had to provide. The county outlet still delivered occasional storm runoff from the raised road, even when rain on the farm itself amounted to almost nothing. And when no new water came, Mae moved stored water from the refuge pond through the terraces in a slow rotation. The system did not defeat drought. It outlasted it. That difference was everything. By August, the rice stood waist-high and green against a county that looked scorched. The ducks moved in khaki-colored lines through the flooded alleys. Every evening their eggs came in warm from the nest boxes. Mae began bringing more to the Saturday market. Then the market morning came when she drove past the sale barn with 63 ducks, 12 sacks of rice, and mud on her boots. The woman selling peaches asked where the rice had come from. Mae told her, "The drowned field." The story spread before the market officially opened. People remembered the plywood sign. They remembered Wade's line. They remembered the county truck and the inspector who had said the ground might not have an agricultural use. By 8:15, the eggs were gone. At 8:40, a restaurant owner named Julian Park bought the remaining rice. He ran a small kitchen in Briar Glen that built its menu around regional ingredients. He had used duck eggs before. He had never seen rice grown in the foothills. He asked Mae how much she could supply. She gave him a number small enough to be true. 20 sacks a month after harvest. 30 dozen eggs a week when production was steady. No promises beyond that. Julian looked toward the dry hills outside the pavilion. "You grew this in the drought?" Mae shook her head. "I grew it in the flood. The drought just made people notice." That line traveled farther than Wade's joke ever had. Colin Rusk returned to Calder Place in September. This time he came in his own truck. No county seal. No clipboard. He wore old boots. Mae met him at the gate. The rice had been cut from the upper terraces, leaving gold stubble above the water. Ducks worked the edges. The refuge pond reflected a sky bleached pale by heat. Rusk stood beside the intake basin and watched a thin stream of runoff enter from the county outlet. He looked at the debris screen, the first flush bypass, the gravel filter, the water control gates, the 3 terraces stepping down toward the pond. "You built all this from the discharge records?" "From the records and from watching what the records missed." He nodded toward the filter strip. "You are still testing after every major change. And after the first storm following a long dry spell." He looked at the water moving through the rushes. "I wrote that this ground had lost agricultural value." Mae said nothing. Rusk continued. "By the definition we used, it had hay production, grazing capacity, conventional return per acre. The definition was the problem, yes." He said the word without defense. Then he told her the county had received 4 complaints about low ground affected by drainage projects. 2 landowners wanted to know whether storage and controlled wetland production could work on their farms. Rusk asked whether Mae would let the extension office bring them out. "I'll show them what is here," she said. "But I'm not selling them a recipe." "What would you tell them?" "That water has a shape. You have to learn the shape before you build anything." Rusk looked toward the terraces. "And if the shape is wrong, then this will not work." He smiled once without amusement. "That is more caution than the county used." Mae looked at him. He did not look away. "I am revising the assessment guidance," he said. "Not because every flooded field is productive. Because we should stop calling every field useless before anyone has studied what the water is doing." That was as close to an apology as Mae expected. It was enough. Wade came in October. The drought had finally broken with 2 days of slow rain. But the damage was already written into empty pastures and auction receipts. He parked at the fence and waited until Mae walked over. For a while he watched the ducks crossing the cut rice terrace. "I sold 30 head, he said. "I heard. Should have sold sooner. Would have gotten more." Mae rested her arms on the gate. Wade looked down at the mud. "You remember what I said?" "Yes." "You can't bale soup." "Yes." He nodded toward the field. "Still can't." "No. But you can feed ducks with it and grow rice." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "I was wrong." Mae did not rescue him from the sentence. She did not sharpen it either. She waited. Wade pointed toward the refuge pond. "What would it take to do something like that on the north draw at my place?" Mae looked toward his ridge. "First, you stop asking what I built. What should I ask? Where your water enters, where it slows, what it carries, how long it stays. Where it leaves. That all. That is the beginning. Wade glanced at the terraces again. You make it sound simple. It took 2 years to make it sound simple. The next spring, 3 farms in Mae County began small water projects. None copied Mae's system exactly. One farmer built a storage cell below a poultry pasture and planted forage reeds. Another used a flooded corner for a controlled duck run. Wade reshaped his north draw into 2 shallow holding basins that watered livestock and reduced erosion below his lane. Mae helped them map flow. She did not draw finished plans. She walked in rain. She watched sediment lines. She marked high water. She asked the same question until the land answered it. What is the water already trying to do? Calder Place changed too. Mae kept fewer cattle. The rice acreage expanded from 3 terraces to 5. Julian Park's restaurant became a standing customer. A grocer in the county seat carried Mae's rice after harvest. The eggs sold before noon most Saturdays. Across ordinary seasons, the flooded meadow began producing something more valuable than one dramatic drought year story. It produced reliable income, not every month, not without risk, but year after year the rice, eggs, breeding stock, and restaurant orders stacked into a working farm enterprise, where the county's paperwork had recorded a loss. One evening in late October, Mae walked the meadow after the ducks had settled. The ridges were dark. The cut rice stubble held the last light. Water entered the catch basin in a quiet thread, crossed the gravel filter, and moved from one terrace to the next with almost no sound. At the barn, the old plywood sign leaned against the wall. Soup Farm on one side, her first water map on the other. Mae had never painted over the words. She no longer needed to. The county had called the meadow drowned, because it was measuring what the water had taken. Mae built a farm by measuring what the water could carry.